Okay, we get into part 3 here of the dating of creation, and we're going to look at the Abrahamic religion here towards the end of it. And to clarify a point, I guess, the Hebrews have never adopted the Greco-Roman calendar like the rest of the world pretty much has at this point, and they still use it along with it. It's easy to calculate from it, but you can see this gravestone here. It's something known as Anno Mundi, and it's looking at from the date that they project when creation was. Most of us look at the date from Christ, but they're looking at it from the date of the supposed same religions idea, or similar pseudo religions, or same idea of creation and when this God had done his ultimate act. So you could date the dates between and then say there was one era and the next and so on if you wanted to look at it that way. But Anno Mundi is looked at, which they say AM, like we say BC and AD. They say AM, which is after the creation or after Mundi. So within the biblical framework and chronology, various dates have been proposed for the date of creation since ancient times to more recent periods. The Bible begins with the book of Genesis, which in God creates the earth and the rest of the universe and the earth's plants and animals, including the first humans, in 6 days. A second narrative begins with the first human pair, Adam and Eve, and goes on to list many of their descendants, in many cases giving the ages at which they had children and died. And if these events and ages are interpreted literally and added up throughout and the genealogies are considered closed, it is possible to build up a chronology in which many of the events of the Old Testament are dated to an estimated number of years after creation. So the Bible is looked at as being a literal work, and so you have to pull it out of there, and it can't have inconsistencies or something that's wrong. Of course, we know there was people before this rejected date, but let's look into this further. Numerous efforts have been made to determine the biblical date of creation, yielding various results, but deciding the difference in interpretation to the use of different versions of the Bible can also affect the result. Two dominant dates for creation using such exist at about 5500 BC and around 4000 BC. These were calculated from the genealogies in the two versions of the Bible, with most of the differences arising from two versions of Genesis. The older dates stem from the Greek or Septuagint. The later dates are based on the Hebrew Masoretic text. The patriarchs from Adam to Terah and the father of Abraham were often 100 years older when they begot their naming son in the Septuagint that they were in the Hebrew or the Vulgate. Almost exactly. You find this in Genesis 5-11. The net difference between the two genealogies of Genesis amounting to 1466 years, ignoring the second year after the flood ambiguity, which accounts for virtually all of the 1500 year difference between 5500 BC and 4000 BC. For example, the period from the creation to the flood derives from the genealogical table of the 10 patriarchs listed in Genesis 5 and 7:6. Called the generations of Adam, according to the Masoretic text, this period consists of 1656 years, and Western Christian Bibles, deriving from the Latin Vulgate, show also this dating. However, the Samaritan texts give an equivalent period to only 1307 years. And according to the Septuagint, the Codex Alexandrinus Elizabeth Bible, it is 2,262 years, so even longer. James Ussher agrees with the dating until the birth of Adam, which he argues took place when Terah was 130 years old and not 70, as the direct reading of Genesis would read. And so you have to have some apologetic interjection here, but this is an easy fix for one person to show, thus adding 60 years to his chronology for the events post-dating Abraham, and this would lead it to be a little bit closer. Earliest Jewish estimations of the earliest post-exilic Jewish chronicle preserved in the Hebrew language, the Seder Olam Rabbah, compiled by Jose ben Halafa in 160 A.D. That's the earliest we have. Dates the creation of the world to 3,761 BC, while the later Seder Olam Zuda to 4,339 BC. The Hebrew calendar has traditionally, since the 4th century AD by Hillel II, dated the creation to 3,761 BC, and you saw that reflected in the grave marker that you saw. The Septuagint, many of these writings here, of the earliest Christians who followed the Septuagint, calculated creation around 5500 BC, giving it an earlier date, something that relates to the fact that, well, you have to have the people of Mesopotamia doing their thing, which leads into the concept, and that's got to be somewhere around here. We look at archaeological record, we see something along that line still going on. We talked about the flood through there, and Christians up to the Middle Ages continue to use that rough estimate, though Clement Alexandria used 5592, Theophilus of Antioch was 5529, Sextus Julius Africanus 5501, Hippolytus of Rome 5500 BC, Gregory of Tours 5500 BC, Panodorus of Alexandria 5493, Maximus the Confessor at 5493 BC, George Synkelus at 5492 BC, Sulpicius Severus at 5469 BC, and Isidore Savelle at 5336 BC. The Byzantine calendar has traditionally dated the creation of the world to September 1st, and there's a reason for September 1st and the 11 days that you leave in between, that the year used to peg at September 1st, and the 11 days you had to leave in between then because of the lunar cycle, missing those days. We put it at September 11th, and you rolled through, and perhaps that's some reason for that date. I knew whenever I was studying deep into trying to figure out the date of Christ and so on, I come to that same exact number again too, and I was looking it up, and I go, I know there's something else with that number, and I was looking around. I left it alone, I ate something, did some other crap, and I came back, and it was sitting on the piece of paper. When I looked at that date, something else totally came to mind other than ancient history, something that had happened much closer to our current present. The Chronicon of Eusebius, early 4th century, dated creation to 5528 BC, while Jerome in 380 in Constantinople dated creation to 5199 BC. Early editions of the Roman Martyrology for Christmas Day use this date, as did Irish Annals of the Four Masters, which I could probably do one in each one of those. Bede was one of the first to break away from the standard Septuagint date for the creation in his work De Temporis, or On Time, completed in 703 AD, dating the creation of 18th of March 3952 BC, but was accused of heresy at the table of Bishop Wilfrid because of his chronology was contrary to accepted calculations around 55 BC, and I believe they killed that man. Masoretic text. After the Masoretic text was published, however, dating creation around 4000 BC-ish became common and was received as wide support. Proposed calculations of the date of creation using the Masoretic text from the 10th century to 18th century include Marianus Scotus at 4192, Henry Franz Clinton at 4138, Maimonides at 4058, 4051, 4021, 4005, 4004, Augustine Calmet at 4002, Sir Isaac Newton himself at roughly 4000 straight, Petavizius at 3984, Theodore Bibliander at 3980 BC, Johannes Kepler himself April 27th, 3977 BC. Based on his book Mysterium Cosmographicum, Heinrich Bunting had it at 3967 BC, Christian Sorensen at 3966, 3964, Martin Luther himself at 3961, Cornelius at Lapide at 3961 also, 3960, off by a year, Gordon Lightfoot on the concept that you had a year and then it was 1, but there was a year before that. I believe his whole argument was on the idea of like, well, whenever you're 10 and then you go to turn to 11, all of that year is your 11th year. So at 10 plus 1 day is the start of your 11th year. Anyhow, among the Masoretic creation estimates or calculations for the date of creation, only Archbishop Usher's specific chronology dating to the creation of 4004 BC became the most accepted and popular, mainly because this specific date was attached to the King James Bible itself. Alfonso of Castile, he commissioned the Alphonsine tablets right here, and composed of astronomical data based on observation, like eclipses, so on, from which date the creation has been calculated to either 6984 BC or 6484 BC. Other biblical estimations came about from a few other people. Christian Charles Johannes Bunsen here in the 19th century dated creation itself to around 20,000 BC. Tarleton Perry Crawford dated the creation to 12,500 BC, pegging it exactly coming out of the Younger Dryas event. Harold Camping dated creation to 11,013 BC, also pegging around the same similar time era of that event. So you can look at other citations and stuff go on here, and here's a lot of the citations that are listed onto this, King's lists and so on like that. But so one thing we're going to look into here too, that I'm going to show you in an upcoming video I've been teasing you with for a while about how Sumerians become the ancient Egyptians and so on. The venerables of Shemsu-Hor, 13,420 years. The reigns before Shemsu-Hor, 23,200 years, totaling 36,620 years. And this shows you a looking back way deep into it, probably way before people are willing to think that anybody would have a recollection for in any way, shape, or form. But those people that are attached to it that they say later, that's the main point. Really not maybe the date that they give, but the people themselves and how we can attach things to those. And so when you look at Oxygios from the Greek, it's Oxygian. It actually means to be primeval or primal, the form the earliest ages. So whenever they say Oxygios, they're really referring to like a caveman, primordial time, when things spawned out of that became a mythical time when people were smart enough to have come up with myths about how things came about. And then historical time where people started really recanting what had actually happened, and then their attempts to look back is what we've been looking at here ourselves, people. And I think we realize now that with things like Göbekli Tepe and its dating coming back to almost this time of the Younger Dryas event, within 1,200 years of the projected wideness of the gap there, it shows you those people, cattle Hoyuk, and the first domestication of people. We've looked at a lot of cave art that shows you the startings and beginnings of a lot of these things, and leading into coming out of the Ice Age into a golden time of fruition where things weren't so cramped anymore, and vegetation and things flourished, and everything became a spring, and every new spring was a new spring and a wellspring of life, and it continued out of there. And these primordial gardens that were created by people happened much later, much more near the time of the biblical time of the Garden of Eden. But we know now that civilization itself dates back before that, and then people of the same caliber but hunter-gatherers date back to this 38 to 40,000 years ago, perhaps a projected 50,000 years ago. And then if we look in the geological record today, the Homo sapiens, or what we consider to be a modern human itself, can go back to 315,000 years so far. So each new finding is another starting revelation, but we'll keep up with those also as we go through this. But I thought I would do this as a set here. It's really something that I had on the books and needed to get marked off. And so we continue. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy, guys. Peace.